Hello, everybody, and welcome to .edu, the public policy podcast from the American Council on Education. Mushtaq Anja here, along with, as always, my illustrious co-host, John Fansmith, Sarah Spreitzer. How are you two?
Doing great. How are you?
I'm doing
Happy
great.
St. Patrick's Day.
Oh, happy St. Patrick's Day.
Well, love that.
Not one of us is wearing green, by the way.
Not a single one of us is wearing green. and the three of us aren't, nor is our good friend Emmanuel Guillory. Emmanuel, friend of the pod, Director of Government Relations here at ACE. Emmanuel, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you, Mushtaq. Glad to be here. And
Yeah,
I am
we have-
happily wearing my Penn colors today. I wear my Penn colors on Tuesday.
Emmanuel, did you watch the Penn Yale men's basketball championship game yesterday?
I didn't.
It
But
Overtime thriller.
Insane.
yeah, I heard about it.
It was really quite something. And we are immediately
Wait, sorry,
alienating Sarah
Mushtaq.
from the
We didn't ask
conversation.
Sarah if she watched either.
You know what? I was going to point out, since Emmanuel didn't watch it, I don't feel that bad.
Madness is upon us. We have brackets that are coming, and in the ACE space, actually, we've got somebody putting up the women's bracket on our chalkboard. So this is very good. Friends, it was great seeing everybody at ACE X 2026. It was especially fun hosting a live podcast. Sarah got multiple Teams chats saying, "Sarah, check your Teams," which
Yeah, I love doing the live podcast. I think we should do that again. Let's take it on the road.
yeah, let's do that, and maybe we could prep, and that'd be good too.
I think everybody liked my off the cuff reactions.
I think that's definitely true. Maybe. And for those who want to dive deeper into all things ACE X 2026, we have a new virtual ACE extended program that starts tomorrow, goes through May. It's like a 6-part webinar series. It's free for ACE members. And, for those of you who are not, first of all, shame on you and your institution. But if you are not and you're still listening and want to experience that, we've got a way for you to be able to subscribe to those webinars. So please look at that. Hey, we have Emmanuel here with us today because we are talking. We're going to spend a lot of time on O3B implementation, grab bag of additional items. We're going to do a quick pulse check on Congress as well. It's been, I think, 5 weeks since we've done one of these, actually, like a regular podcast. So I'm going to have us go through and just do a quick check-in. You three will remind me of where we are with all things. Before we start, 2 other just quick housekeeping items. We've never done this before, but we're going to make a little ask. If you haven't already, if you wouldn't mind liking and subscribing to .edu wherever you get your podcasts, that would be very helpful to us. And that's partially because we were doing a search for higher ed podcasts the other day, and like a bunch of them showed up, and .edu didn't show up maybe quite as highly as I thought maybe we would. And so I thought, and with other podcasts that I'm sure are amazing, but have way fewer reviewers and listeners than we do. So if you wouldn't mind rating and reviewing, I think that's supposed to help. And every podcast I listen to always says rate and review.
And I would love for somebody to add more reviews, because the only review up there
Yes.
is all about how I talk over Sarah on the podcast. So
I was gonna say-
really love to flood the field there with some additional
No, that one's going to
reviews.
stay at the top, but I would love if people note in their review who's your favorite host.
No, let's not do this, please.
It's going to be
Again
Wish
and
Talk.
again.
We all know.
Hey,
We all know.
and then second thing, friends, if you wouldn't mind, thank you again for those of you submitted questions in advance in your registration reports. They really are very helpful for us as we make our outlines. If you wouldn't mind, if you have questions that come up during the show, put it in the Q&A, put it in the chat, but Q&A is even better. I see them a little bit more clearly there. And let's go. So let's do a quick government sort of check-in. What is the government up to? I mean, what has the president been focused on? What's the Department of Education sort of focused on? We're going to talk about implementation of the One Big Beautiful Bill, but what else is happening sort of in Washington right now?
I love that word focus.
Hmm.
Like, is there any focus or is it just chaos? chaotic craziness. I mean, I don't know. Congress seems to be doing things. The president announced that he's not going to sign any future bills until they pass the SAVE Act. And Mushak, I feel like the SAVE Act is something you would follow really closely.
It is a mess of a piece of legislation from my perspective that has a whole grab bag of things. But yes, I mean, in general, the SAVE Act, of course, has to do with all things elections and voting, and it's got legislative priorities from the last like 3 decades of stuff that all got crammed into one bill. And there are not 60 votes to pass it in the Senate, so it is not going to pass. Unless the Republicans get rid of the filibuster in the Senate. And even then, I'm not sure there are 50 votes for this. So I don't know I don't know what good that threat is. I also saw,
Yeah.
Sarah, that the president actually walked that back. He said that he wouldn't sign any bills until the SAVE Act was passed. But then he was asked, well, but DHS is not funded right now. What about that? And he said, no, of course I sign that bill once funding happens there. So I don't know. I guess I don't really believe it.
Yeah, well, the DHS approps bill or the shutdown of DHS does not seem to be going any better than it was when we talked 5 weeks ago. So I don't believe there's any update on that except to say that people are complaining about long TSA lines, and we have a new acting secretary of Homeland Security, which I think, changes things a bit, but I don't think it clears the way for a new DHS funding bill.
I'm surprised, John, at the lack of chatter about actually getting to a path to funding DHS. What are you seeing here?
Yeah, so I think today Hakeem Jeffries is going to introduce a discharge petition in the House, which is a way of sort of going around leadership's control of the floor to try and fund everything at DHS outside of immigration agencies, so ICE and Customs and Border Patrol. And I think that's kind of the issue, right? Democrats have said that they want to see major policy changes, especially at ICE. The administration and a lot of Republicans on the Hill have so far been reluctant to make those changes or agree to those changes. And so we're narrowing in on what that funding, challenge will look like, but there's really no incentive for Democrats to move on this. It's pretty popular with Democrats to hold up funding for this. It's pretty popular with the public generally, right? After what we saw in Minneapolis. So, there's very little urgency to move. Maybe the TSA stuff, as somebody who's going to be flying on Friday, I have a little bit of a vested interest in seeing what that looks like, but, I don't know if that's enough to compel movement here, given, the state of public anger about the actions of ICE.
Um, we'll come back, I think, to some of the other things that the administration might be focused on, but I want to bring Emmanuel in here as we sort of talk about the One Big Beautiful Bill and implementation. Before we dive into detail, I think we can just sort of, ground ourselves here. So I want to talk about the RISE committee and where we are with all things for graduate loans. I want to talk about the AHEAD committee, talk a little bit about Workforce Pell and what is happening there, and maybe some Pell shortfall stuff as well. But let's maybe just start with RISE. So we've been talking about this for months. RISE, I think, is reimagining and improving student education sort of committee. As a reminder, the department reached consensus back in the fall in a negotiated rulemaking session. They opened up a public notice and comment period. I think that period ended earlier this month. The department is feverishly working on finalizing sort of a final rule to try to comply with the master calendar deadline of July 1st. There's some provisions that are about institutional flexibility on some loan limits, some consolidation of some repayment plans. But the biggest flashpoint has been this list of programs that are professional versus graduate, right? The professional programs have higher loan limits. Currently, only 11 programs count as professional. We've talked a lot about this. Emmanuel, we submitted comments before the deadline earlier this month. What do we say in our comment letter, and sort of where are we in this process?
Thank you, Mooch Talk, for that question. And again, I'm very happy to be with all of you today. So the department did release their proposed rule as it relates to RISE. And in RISE, they talked about the student loan changes and all the changes to the student aid, just the student aid in general. And I know you're familiar with this, but that includes getting rid of Grad Plus loans, for example, capping Parent Plus loans in the aggregate and annually. Also reducing the loan limits for graduate students and increasing loan limits for professional students while creating a tiered standard repayment plan and a repayment assistance plan. Also is an income-driven repayment plan, and getting rid of the income-driven repayment plans that we have today. And pretty much all the repayment plans that we have, unless you're grandfathered into it because you have taken out a loan before July 1st of 2026. So where we stand today is proposed rule from RISE is already out. The department is reviewing comments. I believe there were over 80,000 comments that were submitted. So we are awaiting a final rule on that with the department's justification as to any changes they may have made. Now, let me be clear on one thing. So when the negotiating committee gets together and consensus is reached, the department historically has adhered to that consensus language, but it is not mandatory that they do so. They can make changes. And if they do make any changes, they have to articulate why they made those changes in the Federal Register. So, but history and precedent, shares and tells us that when consensus is reached, that is the language that we can expect to become final. But there is still a bit of uncertainty, which yields me to the first thing that we mentioned in our response to the department, which is
just before you do, can I just say one thing, right? I mean, it is the case, right, that the department has to review each of the 80,000 comments and then take that into account when they come up with the final rule. Is that right?
That is right. They have to review, and in their ways of reviewing, they can clump like comments together.
Sure.
So that's why we don't really encourage form letter responses where everyone's saying the same thing, just sending it in from different organizations because they just consider that one entry
Sure.
of a response. But yes, they do have to consider everything.
Which is to say consensus has been reached, but there are these comments that are including the ACE comment. And so, I mean, theoretically, the department's going to have to grapple with each of these very substantive comments, not probably all 80,000, but a lot of them talking about the impacts. I'm sorry. I just wanted to say that ahead of time because, we've put in these comments and I think that although consensus has been reached, I'm not sure that this is a completely moot exercise. I'm sorry, keep going.
Wait, can I ask something? So Mushak's actually holding out hope that even though they reached consensus, somehow the comments are going to change the final rule. I just want to check on that.
Well, correct. And if they don't,
Such an optimist.
Dude, Sarah, we all wear the hats we wear.
You so clearly previously worked at the Department of Education, Mushak.
So look, I think that the thing about it is, right, if they don't seriously grapple with the comments, then I mean they set themselves up for possible litigation, right? So this is, I mean, we'll see what they end up doing. I think the comments by and large are constructive, many of them. And so, if they don't seriously grapple, then I guess we're gonna have to deal with it. But Emmanuel, what do they have to seriously grapple with? What are the nature of these comments?
Well, I would say the comments are constructive depending on how you defined constructive. Maybe for the department, that definition may look a little bit differently than for the person who's sending in the response, but there's politics within politics, and I talk about this often. And so we are in the second layer of politics when we're dealing with the administration and what the department wants to do. They've already, they have their ideals of how they want to manage things, how they want to implement things, and their mind is made up, and they articulate and justify their actions, right? Now, we may not agree with the justifications, but yet they provide a justification for what and why they are doing what they are going to do. So I am not quite sure if the comment is really going to change their minds. Definitely won't change their politics and thinking of things, but who knows? I mean, the department historically has taken comments and has made some tweaks and changes based on those comments. So we'll have to just see what happens with this administration. But What I was going to share was our two main things that we responded to the department to. First is abiding by the master calendar.
Mm.
And the reason why I talked about the importance of there still being some uncertainty is because here we are, it's March. And the One Big Beautiful Bill, which is the name of the bill that was literally signed into statute, goes into effect July 1st of 2026. That's not much time. And even if consensus has been reached, which consensus has been reached on everything as it relates to the implementation of OB3, which can be a great accomplishment for the department, it still leaves room for uncertainty with such a crunch in the implementation window, because the final rule won't come out until what? The earliest will be next month, mid-April, mid to late April. Maybe we'll get a final rule.
For July
Or
implementation then?
And that's only for RISE. That's only for
Right.
RISE. We still have two other proposed rules. One did come out regarding Workforce Pell. Then we have another one coming around accountability. And yet we still have July 1st, 2026 as the implementation date. One thing that's important to note in legislative language is if a bill says beginning on, that's key. So OB3 says beginning on July 1st, 2026. The beginning on means that the department does not have to ensure that everything is operable by July 1st of 2026, but that they can abide by the process of implementing a statute, which is identified in the Higher Education Act. And what I'm talking about is the master calendar. That's the first thing that we talk about in our letter and our response, because if the department was to abide by the master calendar, then the regulations would not go into effect until July 1st of 2027. There's a reason why Congress intentionally put that language into the law. And I will say that it was Republicans that were champions. It was a bipartisan effort, but championed by Republicans and signed by a Republican president to ensure that the master calendar was in statute so that all parties involved, that means stakeholders who are beholden to whatever the regulations are, and the department themselves have ample amount of time to ensure a smooth transition. So that's the first thing that we talk about. And the second thing is professional student, the definition of that. And I know we've had this conversation many times. I don't have to go into depth on that, but we're still trying to make sure that we educate members of Congress on the impacts, the potential negative impacts of only considering 11 programs to be professional degree programs. And I will say we do understand the rationale of the department and what they're trying to do by creating downward pressure on institutions to lower their price. But however, on the other side of the coin, you're arguably increasing the cost of college for students who can't access federal loans in order to subsidize their post-secondary education.
So, Emmanuel, even though Mushtak is super optimistic that somehow we're going to have all these changes, is Congress taking any actions, even though they passed the One Big Beautiful Bill? Is there any legislation out there that could stop this from taking effect on July 1st?
Okay, so I do want to note that you have a microphone in front of you. You look very,
Yeah.
yeah. Wow, look at you.
You know,
Very
you just have to
podcast,
ask John
very
for one.
podcasty.
You need to ask John for one.
Yeah, but wow, I'm missing out on my microphone. Come on, guys.
We can get you
So,
one.
all right, great. Can Congress do something? Of course. They are the legislative branch. So they are the ones that, wrote OB3. The president signed it into law. So they can make all the changes that they want to make. They could require the department to delay this, to abide by the master calendar, to do whatever. But I will say there are three branches of government, and those three branches are supposed to be equal. And I think it's safe to say that the executive branch is kind of, trying to have a bigger piece of the pie, maybe. And so the other branches are fighting to keep that balance. And so as it relates to the legislative branch being able to tell the department, hey, you need to ensure that you abide by the master calendar. Hey, professional degree programs, it was not our intent that there are only 11 programs. You need to do this a different way. The executive branch still needs to adhere to that and actually follow that. And I think we've seen, and I won't say I think, I know that we've seen some challenges there. with the legislative branch indicating to the executive branch what to do, and that not necessarily carrying out in the way that it should have.
So, it's been a common theme over the last, really, I mean, couple of decades, honestly, of Congress sort of taking a little bit of a step back and letting the executive sort of run a little bit roughshod over Capitol Hill. But Emmanuel, I know that you, John, the whole team over at AC, along with the whole community, has really been lobbying to try to expand the number of programs that are in those set of 11. Any progress there? I mean, are there bills out in Congress? Is there interest among representatives in expanding that list?
So great question. And we do have a bill, and the reason why I'm going to talk about the bill by Representative Mike Lawler is because it is the Republican bill right now to address this issue. And as I said earlier, there's politics within politics. There's also politics within politics within politics. So that gets us to Capitol Hill. And there's a whole different political game on Capitol Hill. And so when it comes to a trifecta where you have the Republicans that have the House, the Senate, and the White House, the entire executive branch, they're going to listen to each other more often than not. Definitely to each other over Democrats. And so there are 5 bills, 5 different solutions of ways to, increase the loan limits or delay until July 1st of 2030 or make other changes to the loan limits. But there's one Republican bill that addresses the definition of professional degree. And then there's one Democrat bill that actually addresses the definition of professional degree that was offered by Representative Debbie Dingell. But the Republican bill is the one that we have endorsed because from a strategy standpoint, we are trying to work with the department to expand this list to more programs. And the framework that we've been given is unfortunately a list of programs. Is that our ideal answer and solution? No, but that's what we're working with. And in working on the Hill with a Republican member who's willing to stick their neck out, be an independent thinker, and do what they believe is right, this was the lane that we were also given. And so the Professional Student Degree Act is the bill that we've endorsed. It does expand the list from 11 programs to about 24 programs. And we are hoping that that is a step in the right direction as it relates to getting it to where we ideally would like it to be, which is every program that's identified as a professional degree program in the integrated post-secondary education data systems, IPEDS, should ideally be considered a professional degree program.
Mm-hmm. And Emmanuel, we have a Contact Congress page up. If
Yes.
folks want to write in support of Congressman Lawler's bill or other legislation that would increase these loan limits.
It's
Thank
also
you.
worth, oh yeah.
Go ahead, John.
Just because I saw some questions in the chat, it's the difference in the loan limits. We haven't actually touched on that. The 11 professional programs, students can borrow up to $50,000 a year and up to $200,000 in the aggregate. The graduate programs, which is everyone but those 11, is $20,500 a year, up to an aggregate of $100,000. So a very big difference in what those borrowing limits are. Sorry for interrupting, Emmanuel.
No, and then John, 2 questions for you, and a couple folks have asked in the chat. What's that delta between the 11 and the 24? What are the other 13 programs that the Lawler bill adds to the definition of graduate? And Emmanuel, that might be a question for you. And then John, what are the prospects of this bill? So Lawler's introduced, we have endorsed, where do we think, I assume that most Democrats would probably eventually go along with such a bill to expand the number of institutions that are number of programs that are considered graduate. Where are we?
Yeah, I mean, in terms of path forward, and I think Emmanuel touched on this, this is a bill that I think as of now, correct me if I'm wrong, Emmanuel, has 6 Republican co-sponsors in the House. The Republican majority in the House right now is a 1-vote majority, so having 6 Republicans on board is really important. It's a little bit your point about Democrats supporting it. We do believe this is something Democrats could support, but right now there's a variety of approaches out there, and as Emmanuel indicated, this is the only Republican endorsed sponsored bill that is in play on this issue. There's a number of Democratic ones. So I think there's a little bit of a hesitancy at this point for Democrats to support a Republican bill rather than a Democratic bill. We
Sure.
do think, especially given how much the Hill is hearing from nurses and educators and architects and all these impacted professions about what this will mean for those fields, that you're going to start to see coalescing around the bill that has the best path forward, which is the Lawler bill. But, Emmanuel's really been closest to this, so I'll defer to him here.
I would also say, I think, Emmanuel, I had asked about the July 1st deadline. Like, I don't see anything passing before the July 1st deadline. But I do think once that July 1st deadline happens, we may start to see movement because constituents of Congress will start seeing the actual impacts. Sorry, Emmanuel, just wanted to add that.
Yeah, no, I'm glad you did. With the Professional Student Degree Act, there's actually 8 co-sponsors. So we are up to from 6.
Happy to be wrong in this case.
Yeah, we're still working on those Republican members, of course, and we're still working on those members who are actually on the committee. And we're happy that we at least have one member on the committee. That's Mr. Ryan McKenzie, who's from Pennsylvania. And so, but we're still working on the others. As to the question about the additional programs, I want to make sure I address that. So out of the 10 programs in the Code of Federal Regulations, the department added clinical psychology as an 11th, but then the list that the bill also of programs that the bill also includes is ministry, social work, audiology, physician associate, occupational therapy, physical therapy, nursing, public health, business administration and management, accounting, architecture, education, and special education, and any other degree that meets the requirements of professional licensure that would be approved by the secretary. So that's the language right now. And Sarah, as you mentioned, it's unlikely that something will happen before July 1st of 2026. But at the same time, as you also shared, when that time passes and then the impacts of this bill, we begin to see those realized, I think that Republicans, in hearing from their constituents, will be a bit more pressured to actually make some corrections and some modifications.
I mean, sadly, I think that will do more to move the legislation than our endorsement. Not that our endorsement isn't important.
Well, and one other aspect, just Emmanuel touched on 3 branches of government. The legislative language that the department was supposed to implement didn't say these are the 10 programs that are professional programs. It created a 3-part test for determining a professional program. The department's interpretation, I think, could be pretty easily argued as to be inconsistent with what Congress's intent was. So there is the 3rd branch of government, the judiciary. I wouldn't be shocked if the quickest remedy was somebody going to the courts and saying, look, there is a real harm to students and to programs and institutions of this deliberate misinterpretation of the law by the department, and getting a pretty receptive hearing in a courtroom. So that might be the first step as legislative fixes work through.
Yeah. Okay. What, as always, what should folks that are concerned about this do? What are we asking listeners on this call, campuses to do to either support the Lawler bill or to help remedy this problem?
Well, I wanted to share that when we responded to the department, we talked about 2 primary things: master calendar and the definition of professional degree. The reason why, or professional student, technically, the reason why we talked about those 2 things is because those are the 2 areas where the department exercised their discretion. And what John had shared earlier, there's difference between what's in the actual statute and what they have to do. So the loan limits and the changes that John had mentioned and the differences in what professional students can borrow and graduate students can borrow, that's in statute. The department has no ability to change that and say that graduate students can now borrow the same thing as professional students. While we would love that, they can't do that. But where they exercise their discretion is where we tapped in, because that's where we can challenge them. Now, I say that intentionally because when it comes to what you can do, it's a 2-pronged approach. if you are reaching out to the legislative branch, then I think it's very important. ACE has endorsed the Lawler bill. We need everyone rallying around this bill because it's the only Republican solution that expands the current list. It's not the end all be all solution that we hope that we want, but it is a step in the right direction. It's the best that we have for now. And so any and every support that you can give for that bill and reaching out to your own members of Congress to encourage them to sign on to the bill. We want it to be bipartisan too as well. That would be very, very helpful in reaching out to the department. When it comes to notice and comment, we encourage you to send in comments too as well, but you still, even though it's not an official way of talking to the department, if you have any contacts at the department and you want to reach out and kind of uplift your concerns around the definition of professional student, their formal process for doing that window has closed. That was the RISE comments. But if you have any personal relationships or whatnot, we want to try to beat the drum as much as we possibly can, because I mean, the nurses have done a really good job in their campaign. Their marketing has definitely gotten the attention of a lot of members of Congress. But one thing I can share with all of you is that we have met with every single member on the committee, every single Republican. And in talking to them, while some of them are in agreement with what the department has done with the definition, a lot of them are questioning that. And they are definitely questioning the master calendar and not adhering to that for sure. So we know that we have traction there.
Well, let's keep the pressure up, and please do make your voices heard. And I know that Lori has dropped in the chat, or one of our producers dropped in the chat, an easy link to click on that can help make your voice heard. I want to move us over to Workforce Pell and some Pell Grant changes. So. It's been a busy month at the Department of Ed. So the department released some draft rules on changes to the Pell Grant and then implementation of the new Workforce Pell Grant. So what are the changes? Walk us through those regulations. So Emmanuel, John, either one.
Emmanuel?
Okay. One thing I want to share is that we've had over 250 letters sent to Congress through our Contact Congress, by the way. So we want to increase that number. So if you can please click that link and send that letter, that would be amazing. So we can get that number up higher.
That's quick and easy, by the way.
Yep.
Yeah.
So on March 9th, the department did put out their notice of proposed rulemaking around the Workforce Pell program and changes to the federal Pell Grant. And so when I talk about changes to the federal Pell Grant, what I'm talking about is in statute, there's language saying that institutions, financial aid administrators on campuses have to consider the non-federal grant and scholarship aid of every student that comes in first. Because when they look at that aid, if that aid meets or exceeds the cost of attendance, then that student will not have access to the Pell Grant. Now, on one side of the coin, we can say, oh no, like that, why are they doing that? The Pell Grant's the cornerstone of federal financial aid, which technically it still is the cornerstone of federal financial aid because we're looking at non-federal versus federal. But on the other side of the coin, it does extend their Pell eligibility for future years should they not, have non-federal grant or scholarship aid to even cover the cost of attendance. But either way, in looking at this statutory change, the department did use discretion within this. And the discretion the department used was looking at grants or scholarships that would not be considered non-federal sources. And so those sources includes things such as Section 529 plans in the Internal Revenue Code, or any tax credit that you would receive under Section 25A of the Internal Revenue Code. It also would include assistance provided by a state and is designated by the state to offset a component of the cost of attendance. And two more things, any payments made or services provided under Title IV of the Social Security Act would not be included on the behalf of any child or youth. And also, lastly, emergency financial assistance provided to the student for unexpected expenses. And I just kind of said that at a very high level. We do have a detailed summary that goes into this in more detail, but keep it at high level for the sake of time. In moving to the recalculation of the federal Pell Grant, the department used discretion here as to how they would consider recalculating if for some reason during a year, during an award year, a student actually did receive non-federal grant aid that met or exceeded cost of attendance for the first half or the first semester, but for the second semester, they did not. And so in that instance, an institution would then have to either do two things. They either are required to reduce the non-federal grant or scholarship aid that student received, or they are required to actually return all Pell Grant funds that the student received for that award year and cancel any future disbursements for that award year. And so I wanted to make sure I highlighted that.
And
Now,
Emmanuel, oh, I was going to say, Emmanuel, that's all in the head final rule, correct?
so
That was
proposed rule.
published, the
Yeah,
proposed rule.
yeah,
So I'm going to ask our producers to drop the link to that, so people can see the details in the very good summary that you did. But ahead also included Workforce Pell, right?
right. And that's where I was about
Oh,
to head
thank
to
you.
next. Mhm. So in head also included accountability, but we're still
Mm,
waiting on a proposed rule for accountability.
okay.
So as we move to the Workforce Pell program, this is a bipartisan program. There was a bipartisan Workforce Pell Act that was introduced by Rep. Elise Stefanik, and it's been bipartisan for quite some time. So full support for this program, and this program does allow for students who are actually enrolled in, so the program has to be a minimum of 8 weeks, but less than 15 weeks of instruction. And the program has to be at least 150 clock hours, but less than 600 clock hours. And then 4 semesters, but less than 16 semester or tri-semester hours, or 6, but less than 24 quarter hours. So if those programs exist on your campus, they're able to access the Pell Grant. Now, so that sounds great, right? There's a lot of hoops you have to kind of jump through in order to get that approved. So in order to get that approved, there's a process that the governor actually has in the state. So it has to be approved by your governor. And if you are in a tribal land, then it's the tribal government that would do that approving. There's also a process through the Secretary of Education that program has to be approved by the secretary. And the secretary actually has their thumb as well on the state process, because the secretary has to approve the termination by the governor too as well. And then there is a value added earnings metric that every program has to meet. So with that value added earnings, we are looking at earnings that are 150% over the poverty level. And so that's a little bit different than the earnings and the accountability metric that was also a part of the One Big Beautiful Bill. But that's also an important piece. And included in the government approval of that is this 70% completion rate and 70% job placement rate that these programs have to also have as well. And so institutions can appeal this through the governor's process. There's an appeals process, and each state has the ability to determine what that appeals process looks like. So there's not a standard set process that's actually indicated in the regulatory text. So that could be a challenge, right? Some states may be more lenient than other states. You're definitely allowing politics, the first layer, to get in the way of that. Now, when it comes to these programs losing eligibility, so if these programs are not approved by the governor, not approved by the secretary, or they don't meet, the completion rate, job placement rate, and the value added earnings, then they can lose eligibility. Now, something that I want to make sure that I'm clear, because the way I
Emmanuel, I'm
realize,
sorry, can I
oh,
just interrupt? They
Sure.
would lose eligibility or they would not be
Wouldn't
eligible.
meet the requirements for
Right. So
eligibility.
they wouldn't be eligible in the first place for
they
the workforce.
Yes, they wouldn't be eligible. Thank you. That's a very important distinction. Since there are no workforce Pell programs that exist today, then yes, they would not be eligible. But when they do become eligible, they could be ineligible if they still don't meet these things. Um, so
You have to meet you have to meet them to be
Thank
eligible and maintain them to stay eligible.
That's right.
And these are, as Emmanuel's pointed out, these are very stringent requirements. A
Sure.
70% job placement rate within 6 months, a 70% completion rate. Like this is very stringent requirements Congress put in place around these programs.
So, John, what are you hearing from our campuses? So very stringent. They need to go through several layers to sort of be eligible. There was a lot of fanfare made about Workforce Pell, short-term credentials. This is going to be great. And so I guess two layers of the question. First, John, then maybe Emmanuel. What are we hearing from campuses? Like, is this going to be as big a thing? And then where can we advocate? What can the community sort of do here?
Yeah, I think the broad understanding among institutions, and I think this was also reflected by the estimates of what this would cost in
Mhm.
Congress, is that there'll probably be a pretty small take up of this program. For a lot of reasons, there are enormous hoops to jump through just to get the programs eligible, and these are generally short-term programs. Not all institutions offer them.
Right.
And given the criteria, I think a lot of schools just will struggle, especially if you're thinking about community colleges where resources are often stretched thin to begin with, of trying to navigate this process. So, it'll be interesting. I don't think next year is going to be the test. I think probably 2 or 3 years we'll see, sort of the likelihood of this being sustainable and growing as an area of education. I really hope it is, because I do think the premise here is really good. What we want is people to leave high school and have an educational path forward, whether that's a degree program or otherwise. And certainly, I think there's a role for the federal government incentivizing that, which is what this would do. Um, these criteria, a lot of them insisted on by Democrats who are worried about fraud and abuse. You get the logical argument for it, but to the extent they're a barrier to actually letting students access them, to letting institutions provide that program to the students, we might see some variations of what the statutory requirements are going forward. I think this is one that's probably going to be revisited a few times in the next few years.
And there is a balance here, right, of wanting to preserve taxpayer dollars, ensure that they don't go to programs that don't have good placement rates,
Of
while
course.
still wanting to make sure that we have enough ability to be able to have programs demonstrate that they can meet these requirements, in a fast moving, God knows what's going to happen to all these, entry level sorts of jobs in a new AI infused world. So no, very interesting, very tricky. What should they be paying attention to? What data should they be collecting? How should they think about all of this?
Yeah, well, I think first of all, it's looking at the existing programs that you have on campus, which ones might meet eligibility criteria, and then thinking, especially if you have not been talking to your legislature, talking to your governor's office, working with local workforce boards, thinking about the parameters of what's required of these, high demand skills in your area, thinking about the probability of going forward, what level of student interest you have. I mean, it looks very different if you have 100 students enrolled at a time versus you have 8 students enrolled at a time, whether the logistical and administrative hurdles are going to make sense for you to pursue it.
Mhm.
But that said, again, this is meant really very truly as an access vehicle for people who are already taking these courses and often don't have the resources of many traditional college students. So, balance that out, what you are trying to provide to the students coming to your campus, what they're looking for, and how you can best assist them with what are likely to be some pretty significant challenges to get them in place.
Is it is it fair to think about it right now as almost a pilot program? Because it's not going to be as widely
Yeah, it's
used?
interesting, actually. I mean, I wouldn't have said it that way, Sarah, but I think that's probably pretty accurate. I think given the 1 year prior operational requirement, you can't even have new programs created to meet the criteria for another year or so before they'd be eligible. And given, this is brand new, I think you're right. For at least the next year or two, I think we're kind of in the test pilot stage rather than saying, in a lot of ways, when we've made changes to the Pell Grant program before, it's immediate. The impact is sort of goes into the space. That's not the case here. It really requires a lot of intentionality and rethinking from institutions as to how they participate.
Manuel, quick question, just one last one on this, and I want to move us on to just looking at the clock, maybe admissions and the consumer transparency supplement. But just on the earnings, for the short-term Pell. If a student graduates high school, let's say in Arizona, goes to school in Texas, gets a job in Wisconsin, right? What's the earnings level that's sort of being evaluated? What state are we using? What's the poverty level? Is it based, how are they going to determine that?
Well, that's a really good question. And I don't want to answer that incorrectly. I believe it's where the student resides. Um, but I would want to double check. But I believe
I
it's
think
where the student resides.
I think that's my understanding as well, or where the job is. I think, which I think
Mm,
are it's one of the it's the tracks the two, but I don't think it's where it's certainly not where you graduated high school.
no.
So
Huh.
um, but yes, we'll have to see how this all sort of gets implemented. And the as somebody who spent a lot of time putting together, helping put together this earnings metric on the Carnegie classifications. I mean, there's a lot of complications on which data are available and when they become available, and then what the right matching is. So, um, okay, sort of keeping an eye on the clock. Uh, just wanted to sort of move us to admissions. So big news this week on the admissions and consumer transparency supplement side, right? So the date by which new admissions data was due to be collected, by the department or submitted to the department was supposed to be March 18th. I guess that's tomorrow. In response, 17 states attorneys general sued the Trump administration for declaratory and injunctive relief. District court judge issued a temporary restraining order on Friday, has asked for a further hearing on March 25th, which means that March 18th deadline is at least temporarily paused. The state's attorneys general in their lawsuit, I'm just going to read from the lawsuit, sort of summarized, I think, some of the problem really well. Quote, IHEs face an untenable dilemma, quickly compiling data they typically would have years to collect and submit, all the while knowing that the data may suffer from inconsistencies given the haste with which it has been prepared and the lack of guidance from the Department of Education on what key definitions and data elements mean. As the presidential memorandum and agency guidance make clear, the defendants plan to rely on this data to assess compliance with SFFA and drive enforcement actions. The consequences from the defendants' sloppy implementation of the IPEDS Act survey are therefore severe. IHEs will face costly investigations based on unreliable data, end quote. Okay, let me take a quick step back. Remind us, what is this thing? What is the Admissions and Consumer Transparency Supplement? Why is this data request? Who's getting this data request? Why is it so different than what IPEDS has typically collected in this regard?
So, yeah, I'll jump in, Emmanuel. Sorry. This is something the Trump administration put into place at the end of last year. It is essentially an enormous request for data around primarily the admissions process, and with a strong focus on the consideration of race or gender or ethnicity in the admissions process. It expands IPEDS reporting to include information on an enormous range of information on all applicants to institutions, all applicants who were accepted or denied at the institution, and all students who enrolled at the institution. It only applies to what are defined as selective institutions, so it doesn't cover open enrollment institutions. But I think, and Emmanuel might correct me, it's still about 2,800 or so schools fall under the very broad term of selective institutions. Um, look, it's not a secret. This administration, through executive orders and public statements, has said time and time again they don't believe institutions are following the dictates of Students for Fair Admissions versus Harvard and UNC, that you cannot consider race as part of a holistic admissions process. I think they believe that they will get data that will support that belief. We could go through this and talk for a while. The process they used to put this forward was deeply flawed. It didn't follow either common sense or the standard requirements of the Administrative Procedures Act. They're asking for data that in many cases they would have told institutions a few years ago you shouldn't be collecting in the first place around race and other things. It's a mess. It's a giant, burdensome mess that's going to produce unreliable, invalid data And it's going to be used as a cudgel by the administration to support a pre-existing belief about how schools are treating race in admissions. So it is a real problem. Certainly, I think we're very happy with the TRO. I will say there is a lot of discussion right now about who and what that TRO covers, and I've seen some comments about it in the chat. There's some belief, and it seems like this might be true at the department, that the temporary restraining order only covers institutions in the 17 states where the attorneys general had filed suit. I don't think that was the intent of the attorneys general. I don't know whether that was the intent of the court. You might have a better read than I do, Mushtaq. It still seems very unclear. Certainly, hopefully you would, believe that the court will intervene to make it clear to everyone and allow time for a discussion of the merits of the suits before forcing people to compel. But, the department has shown tremendous reluctance to do the right thing here and allow institutions sufficient time and provide clarity as to what they're actually asking for and what's reasonable to ask for. So you can see that there might be conflicting interpretations of what the judges actually said, which doesn't help us when we're trying to parse out whether to file tomorrow or not.
Yeah, I don't want to give, I tell my students all the time, don't give legal advice when you don't know for sure and you're not their client. So I would just ask institutions that aren't sure whether they're covered under the temporary restraining order of the 17 states, just ask your general counsel to review the TRO. We can drop a link to that in the chat, or I can find it and put it in hopefully quickly. And just make sure, because yeah, you don't want to miss a deadline if you're feverishly trying to comply and you're unsure about whether or not the TRO applies to you.
And, I think this is very similar to other things that this Department of Education has done, where it's rush, 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 a lot of questions, and people are going to try and comply, whether or not they're able to comply, right? So I mean, it's really, really difficult, I think, for our institutions. And I think your advice of talking to your general counsel is a good one.
Yeah, and it's worth, reiterating if I think I kind of banged this drum a little hard, but institutions are rightfully trying to meet their compliance obligation. The problem here is not the deadline. The problem here is the request in and of itself. It is functionally an impossible request to meet in any way that is going to be reliable and valid. A lot of schools simply don't have the data they're being asked to produce. They haven't been collecting it over the 5-year look back period that's required for submission. And then you think about the burden on institutions, institutional researchers. The department itself estimated it would be 200 hours of work for an institution. I think Emmanuel and I probably laughed when we saw that estimate. It is so ridiculously low given what they are talking about. And you think, school with 10,000 students, how much data that is. School with 200 students doesn't have the resources to pick up 200 additional hours, even if that was all it took. So it is a bad idea at any level. It is an impossible deadline at any level. And the deadline, of course, is meaningful. Your advice is well taken. Talk to your general counsels. But, this should not be going forward in the first place. And hopefully the attorneys general will be the start of getting some action, either the department withdrawing this or courts instituting common sense.
What's so frustrating about this is, to the extent that this is about compliance with the SFFA, all the years worth of data pre-SFFA are irrelevant. I guess you can say there's some sort of baseline, but the amount of work that needs to be done at our colleges, IR offices, for what is essentially maybe a fishing expedition on the other side, to try to find some institution that's like not complying now with the law by using data that's pre the law changing. Very, very frustrating. So speaking of which, what traction have these arguments gotten, John, Emmanuel, and what are we hoping institutions are? What are we asking the department to do at this point?
Well, Emmanuel has been asking for a while for them to pull this back entirely, and then to try to give us at least a reasonable amount of time. And I think we've and I say we because I'm taking credit for Emmanuel's work here, have had a little bit of success in shaping, getting some greater clarity on some of the data fields we're required to do. And I'll let Emmanuel chime in. But, by and large, and this is me talking, the administration has predetermined an outcome here, and they have a viewpoint that's not supported by the facts as to what schools are doing. And this is not a process that is driven by a rational examination of institutional policies or the ability to get, really meaningful data in. This is a very politicized process, and that's what's driving the boat here. So they have not, to my mind, and Emmanuel, correct me, been especially receptive to the concerns that have been raised by the community because, again, they're not moving forward on sort of a good policy foundation for making these changes.
And one thing that I'll say to be devil's advocate is that the administration behind the scenes has at least been having conversations with, key stakeholders. So they've been taking meetings, and they did actually allow for institutions to request an extension up till April 8th, as long as they met two sort of thresholds with completing the surveys and answering the questions. So there has to be actions already done by the institution, but assuming those actions have taken place, they can request an extension if they need it. So we at least appreciate an acknowledgement of that. And as John had mentioned, yes, I have been pushing and fighting for this to not even happen, ideally, but for at least an extension until June 18th, based on a survey that was conducted by the Association of Institutional Research in order to gather feedback from the institutional research officers about data quality and integrity, and really feeling like 90 more days could help strengthen the data quality, which would then strengthen the integrity of that data too as well. And so, but, here we are in a new world where there's a temporary restraining order, and maybe there might be a preliminary injunction. Who knows what's going to happen on the judicial side of things that we could not have predicted. So we're just kind of in a wait and see mode as to how this is all going to unfold. But
well, shout out to our friends at AIR for helping on all of this. That survey was enormously helpful. Okay, we have just a couple of minutes left. Sarah, can I ask you a very quick question?
I say no.
Okay,
I'm just
fine.
kidding.
Well,
No,
Sarah,
it's okay. What's the question?
I feel like I feel like I have been hearing about foreign gift reporting in Section 117 more in the last couple of weeks, and we always tease
Really?
you.
Has it
Yeah.
just been me talking about it though? Maybe that's why you've been hearing about it.
Well, I do pay attention to literally every word you say, but I also feel like I've been hearing about it from other places besides just you. So, what's going on, Sarah? What do we
Well,
need
maybe
to?
it was because the Senate held a hearing last week on foreign funding to institutions of higher education. So I'd remind everyone, check on your Section 117 compliance. That's the requirement that you have to report foreign gifts or contracts to your institution at $250,000 or above. Congress is expected to consider a bill called the Deterrent Act. It's been around for a couple of years. It would greatly expand Section 117 in ways that we think is very problematic and likely going to be more burdensome than worthwhile, including requiring the Secretary of Education to review any contract that an institution has with a country of concern, which would be China, Russia, Iraq, and North Korea. I hope none of us have contracts with North Korea. But there's a lot in the Deterrent Act, and it seems that this issue is heating up once again. I know the House Committee on Education and Workforce is going to have a hearing at the end of the month on the topic. Senate Judiciary was supposed to have a hearing this week on China, espionage, and innovation at our institutions. That hearing was postponed, but obviously it's still being considered by our policymakers. So still important to all of them.
Yeah. So maybe fair to say, our institutions should always be complying with Section 117 and their obligations there, and maybe just double check and triple check right now, given the
Yes.
salience of the issue on the Hill and at the White House, it seems.
Yeah, they just announced a new foreign funding dashboard at the Department of Ed, which we have concerns with because it has cumulative data as opposed to breaking it out by year so you can actually see trends. And they also just signed a new interagency agreement with the Department of State. This is their new favorite thing, to sign interagency agreements, and the Department of State is supposedly going to do something related to 117 reporting. We're waiting to hear what that's going to be.
Okay. Well, friends, we are at time. I think, given that there's, I don't know, 5 other things I wanted to ask about on this outline, it seems like maybe we shouldn't wait 5 weeks for us to do one of these regular ones again.
Let's do it tomorrow.
Let's do it in 2 weeks, Sarah.
Oh, really?
And
Okay.
Emmanuel, thank you so much for coming, for all of your help unpacking some of these very complicated issues. We're gonna have to have you back sometime soon. John, Sarah, Emmanuel, any last words?
Thanks for having me.
Thanks for
Happy
joining
St.
us, Emmanuel.
Patrick's Day.
Yeah,
Yeah,
and happy
thanks,
St. Patrick's Day.
Emmanuel.
Wear your green, even though none of us are.
Thanks, everybody. We'll see you all.